All right, Dalton, we talked a lot about our top players returning in college football. Let's talk about some players who need a big bounce back year, whether that be from injuries or just a down year overall the year before. I think the first player we have to talk about for this exercise, Dalton, is Connor Weigman, who is the number one quarterback in the 2025 NFL draft, according to our lead draft analyst, Trevor Sikkema. I don't think you or I agree with that. I think we both would have Carson Beck as our number one quarterback, but Trevor loves him, man, and it's not hard to see why. Connor Weigman, why he needs to bounce back is because in the fourth game of the season, I believe against Auburn, he had a season-ending foot injury. Before that, though, he had a 91.9 grade in those first four games, which was tied for if you extend the snap minimum to 200, basically, he would be the third highest graded quarterback in the country, behind only Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix. And he's tied with Dylan Gabriel with a 91.9 grade. So Connor Weigman, when healthy, was fantastic. And when healthy, he had the third best passing grade in the Power 5 as well, only behind Bo Nix and Jane Daniels and right in front of Carson Beck. So former five-star recruit, was only a true sophomore last year for the Aggies. So he's got a lot of talent. He's got an unbelievable zip on that arm. And like I said, man, he was fantastic in the limited time that we saw from him in his sophomore campaign. So Connor Weigman, a big bounce back guy for us next year, Dalton.
And I'll throw my piece in on this because I think it's very hard to place. Like if you asked me to place Connor Weigman on a draft board right now, I wouldn't even know where to place him because we've seen so little of him. I think it was 5 or 6 games in his freshman year. And last year, a heavy portion of that grade is absolutely tearing up New Mexico and Louisiana Monroe, who are 2 of the 10 worst teams in the country. If you played those 2 teams every week, you'd win a Heisman. So he was decent against Miami, a couple turnover-worthy plays, off to a rough start against Auburn, and then got hurt. Look, Weigman, he's got a big arm. Former baseball player, he's got a huge arm. Little bit of a baseball-ish delivery that got a little more compact in 2023, but not all the way there. And I know why Trevor loves him is because he throws a hell of a dig route, man. He can throw over the middle in that intermediate area of the field to the dig, to deep crossers, things like that. But right now, that's to me the only place he looks comfortable throwing as well. Like outside the numbers is not nearly the same production, and I know the middle that middle of the field is really important in modern football, but you got to be able to give me something elsewhere. And again, just small sample and the 2 games that are tilting his stats. Like I could take a lot of quarterbacks in the country and put them up against last year's New Mexico and Louisiana Monroe, and they probably do something similar. I'm not saying Weigman's not talented. I just think based on sample size, like we need to pump the brakes. It is there. I'm not going to tell you he's not going to have a big year. The other question I do have is we have Jimbo Fisher, who over the last 2 decades was a known quarterback whisperer, not at Texas A&M anymore.
Yeah.
And Jimbo used to have every quarterback go in the first round, and maybe Weigman was on his way there had Jimbo remained. But now you've got a new coach. You've got Mike Elko as a head coach. We'll see what the chemistry is between Weigman and Colin Klein as well, who runs things a lot differently than the old traditional ways that Jimbo ran it with Jameis, with E.J. Manuel, with Christian Ponder, with all those guys he used to have at Florida State, even Texas A&M guys. I believe Kellen Mond was up under Jimbo Fisher at A&M. Yeah. Like he has a ton of guys going in the NFL, and Jimbo. I just wonder how Jimbo being gone is. I think about Jameis Winston here, right? Baseball player turned quarterback. Funky-ish delivery, but got to the number 1 overall pick. But now that Fisher's gone, I just think there's so many variables in such a small sample with Weigman. Definitely a bounce-back candidate, no question, right? I just would not – I wouldn't even know where to place him on a draft board right now. We've seen so little of him, honestly. So I think there's a lot of variance for A&M. I'll tell you what, their first game of the year – we're going to learn a lot about him and Riley Leonard both facing each other. Man, yeah. It's going to be crazy. But I'll tell you another quarterback that people are high on, hoping for a bounce back, but has kind of a weird sample because he's hurt a lot too, is Jalon Daniels from Kansas, man. Last year, an 84.3 passing grade when he played. I believe it was around an 80 the year before that as well when he played. And, he gets hurt about 15 minutes before the Texas game, and then we just don't see him again. His back injury, and Jason Bean had to come in there, and they still had a 9-win season. But this year, Daniels needs to stay healthy. There's some people who are really, really high on him. coming into next year's draft. He can really sling it over the middle of the field. He's a really good athlete. They got a really good run game. He's got a high understanding of that offense, but he needs to play. And this year, they don't have Jason Bean to save them, right? I believe he signed in Indianapolis as an undrafted free agent. It's just Daniels. If Daniels plays all 12 games, Kansas has a legitimate shot to win the Big 12. They have the ninth highest graded offense in the country last year. Devin Neal was our number 8 running back. They have just about all of their receiving weapons returning. Now they lose Andy Kotelnicki, their offensive coordinator, but they're going to find ways to score points. They use the width of the field better than anybody. If Jalon Daniels is healthy, he's going to have it for all 12 games. He's going to have Kansas in contention for a Big 12 title.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think Jalon Daniels. I think Trevor had Jalon Daniels as a top 5 quarterback, I think, too, in his QB rankings for 2025 NFL draft. So a couple QBs that Trevor really likes that need to bounce back from injuries. Another guy is Emeka Egbuka, who was such an amazing player as a true sophomore in 2022. And then he really just battled injuries this past year. Missed 3 games due to an ankle injury. But in 2022, man, he was the second most valuable receiver in the Power 5, according to our wins above average metric, only behind Marvin Harrison Jr., his teammate. He was 5th in the Power 5 in receiving yards, tied for 7th in receiving touchdowns. He's a smooth route runner, routinely finds soft spots in zone coverage, really high IQ wide receiver is the best way to put it, and I think he's a really, really smooth route runner too. So I think he's going to remind a lot of people why we were so high on him a couple years ago. Kind of a lot of people forgot about him last year. Not a lot of people are talking about him as highly this year. I still think he's a top 3 receiver in college football right now, and he's going to be the veteran leader of what's a very, very young Ohio State receiver room outside of Emeka Egbuka. He's a much-needed veteran presence in that room, and I think he'll be huge in bringing along Jeremiah Smith in the next wave of Ohio State receivers that we have.
Yeah, I agree, and not even just bringing along those guys. Really talented. He's got first-round talent himself, right? And he could be a huge X factor for Ohio State in a possible national title run. I'll give you a player out at Oregon that's very similar to Egbuka. Silky smooth route runner, coming off an injury-riddled season, who could be an X factor in the national title picture. That's Evan Stewart, right? The transfer from Texas A&M. Just a fantastic route runner. I'll be honest with you. I'm curious to see if he can bring more physically, whether it be after the catch or if he can get a step faster, because he's not – I would say he has good speed, not elite speed, and he's a kind of a thinner guy. Like, I think some of his route running reminds me a little bit of Devontae Smith, but he's not quite as good after the catch as Smith was. But Stewart he's got a perfect fit in that offense, man. I'm going to tell you something. He was off to a raging hot start last year. He dominated Miami when they played them, even though Miami beat them in the game. I believe it was 48-33. Stewart fits that offense perfectly. Like the complement with Tej Johnson, the way they scheme guys open, and he's different. He's different than Troy Franklin was, because Troy Franklin was like a long speed burner getting over the top. You're going to see Dylan Gabriel with a stupid high completion percentage this year, throwing to Stewart, throwing to Johnson, throwing to Ferguson and Herbert, his 2 tight ends. They're still going to run the ball. They're going to be play action crazy like they always are. But Stewart, I think another 5-star recruit, one of your guys. He's as good as any route runner in the country. Again, I'd like to see him add a little more physical element to his game. But if he's healthy, coming off an ankle injury that he kind of fought through last year, and he was off to a hot start, if he stays hot like we saw the first 3 weeks of last season, he should easily be in for a 1,000-yard season, if not a lot more.
Yeah, I recently ranked Oregon as the best receiving corps in the country, and I think it's because they have the best receiving duo in the country, and Tej Johnson and Evan Stewart, who both were my top 10 receivers in the nation as well, and the only duo in the top 10. So, yeah, Evan Stewart absolutely should be in for a big year, and I'm really looking forward to seeing if he can do it, man. Because, like I said, former top 10 recruit, had a really good freshman year, and then sophomore year was just derailed by injuries. And then also wasn't playing with Connor Weigman either, because another guy we were talking about, because he was hurt as well. So Evan Stewart, I'm so excited to see him with Dylan Gabriel next year. I think he really could be unlocked. And if he bounces back, he absolutely could be a first-round pick, just like Emeka Egbuka and Connor Weigman, for that matter as well. All right, my last guy here, Dalton, is another guy. So I had Egbuka as my number 3 receiver in the country heading into next year. This guy's my number 3 tight end in the country heading into next year. And honestly, if you wanted to pick any tight end in my top 10, you probably could have for this video, because there's so many guys bouncing back from injuries. I'll go with Brant Kuithe, though, who we didn't see at all. We haven't seen it all since September of 2022. He tore his ACL in September and meniscus in September, and he missed all of the basically all the 2023 season and all but 4 games in 2022. Even though he's been absent, though, he should still be seen as one of the top tight ends in the country for what he did in the 3 years before that. From 2019 to 2021, he was all Pac-12 every single year, third-team All-American as a sophomore in 2019. In those 3 years, he led all tight ends in the country with 31 forced missed tackles and the 5th most receiving yards in the country with 1,449. I also think another guy you could kind of throw in there on this is his quarterback Cam Rising, who also, like Brant Kuithe, missed the entire 2023 season with a torn ACL. But yeah, I think both Kuithe and Rising, both massive bounce back players for Utah. And if they bounce back and the way they bounce back is going to determine a lot for Utah, who is right now probably the favorite to win the Big 12 next year.
Yeah, I agree. I think the combo talk there is really good with the both of them. I don't know. I get what we're getting at here. I don't know that they should be favored. I'm not sure who would be favored. The Big 12 is going to be so much fun this year. It's going to be wide open.
I think they're the favorites.
I don't know that I would. I don't know that I'd favor Utah necessarily, just because we need these 2 guys specifically to bounce back. But I get it, and they never lose at home, so that's always an advantage there. Yeah, I'm with you. I think that combo might be the biggest X factor in the Big 12.
Yeah.
But, yeah, Kuithe, man, I think he was top 8 in yards per route run 3 different times. I mean, anytime he's on the field, he's an incredible player. Lastly here, I was adamant that we had to get one defensive player. And you guys were like, well, who do you want? And I was like, okay, maybe I got to think about that. But it feels wrong not to include defensive players in this, right? And I'm actually going to go with a really, really big name. And that's Harold Perkins from LSU, right? And look, I'm not going to say it's not at all his fault, right? You see the drop in defensive grade there last year. Didn't rush the passer as much last year because he was playing. Now he's playing a more traditional linebacker spot, more suitable to his size, right? Hovers around 220, 225. He's just too small to play on the edge full time, especially considering he's probably going to be a first-round pick going to the NFL. Now, he's just not built like, say, a Micah Parsons, who's like 250, who could move back and forth, play a little bit of both. But to his credit, he did a really, really nice job in coverage last year, right? I'd kind of like to see them use him more as a blitzer, maybe more creative, maybe kind of shuffle him back and forth, right? There's even guys in the NFL, I think about Parsons or a Frankie Louvu, who succeed kind of moving back and forth, like linebacker on early downs and edge rusher on late downs, because his pass rushing talent's freakish. It's just crazy. But, like, I'm curious to see if there's a bounce back, at least statistically, where maybe he does become an elite linebacker, right? And we're wrong about just wanting him to rush the passer constantly, right? But he's built like a linebacker, and his talent is more suitable to an edge rusher. And honestly, I think he led LSU in coverage grade, which is also, I mean, more power to him because he's adjusting on the fly. But let's see if Harold Perkins, as a linebacker, can keep himself in that first-round conversation after like a bit of a dip in production. And again, not really his fault. It's not like he got worse as a football player. The position switch, it's tough. I bet he's never played linebacker in his life. He was probably always on the edge because he was always a freak on the edge, right? But we're going to find out, I think, this year in his second year at the position, what Harold Perkins really is down there in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, we absolutely are. He's kind of the only one that's not a player bouncing back from injury. Now, he still had a really good year last year, especially in coverage, but it's just you want to see more of that defensive weapon that we saw as a true freshman in 2022 and why we're so high on him coming into this year. And just kind of you're right, it was a little bit disappointing. I think some of that was due to just how he was used, and hopefully Brian Kelly kind of uses him more as a pass rusher next year as a blitzing linebacker. But yes, what we got for our top bounce back candidates in college football heading into 2024.